Hi there, thanks very much for listening to my talk, which is just a brief talk about Guy Kahane's Pascalian wager about whether we should accept metaethical nihilism, or in particular, why we should stay clear. So Kahane, offers a Pascalian argument. I'll explain what I mean by that in a moment, that we shouldn't flirt with nihilism. And it's a really great paper. There's some very quotable lines in particular, including the following. We even have reasons to suppress any growing suspicion that nihilism is true, even if this suspicion could be supported by forceful reasons. In effect, we have pragmatic reasons not to try to find out whether nihilism is true. So, depending on some causal facts about how doing metaethical theory affects our belief in nihilism, if the argument is correct, then maybe we have reasons not to engage in this discussion. Nevertheless, I'll press on. Just to say a little bit about what nihilism is. The slogan form is that nihilism says that nothing matters. It can be a little bit difficult to explain exactly what is meant by matters, so it's often more tractable to put it in terms of reasons. So evaluative nihilism says that nothing has value, nothing is good or bad, or nothing is better than anything else. If it extends to the aesthetic, nothing has, artistic value, for example. Practical nihilism says that there are no practical normative reasons, no justifying reasons for action. So two ways of putting it is that one is to think that whereas moral error theory says that all positive moral claims are false, all claims that murder is wrong, for example, are false. Nihilism extends that to all claims about values and reasons. So not only do you not have reason not to commit murder, you also don't have reason to, for example, take the necessary means to your end. Another way of putting it is that nihilism is a more extreme version of internalism about reasons. Internalism about reasons says that there are no reasons which don't somehow, a lot buried in that word, but don't somehow connect to or rest on your desires. Nihilism says that even your desires don't provide reasons. So, if, according to practical nihilism, there are no reasons for action, that implies that either any subjective concerns you have don't provide you with reasons for action, along the lines I just sketched when comparing with internalism. You may still have desires and carings and so on, but they don't provide you with reasons for action. Or, and these are not mutually exclusive, in the option that Kahane defends at some length, in fact, maybe accepting nihilism will cause a decay of subjective concerns. If caring about something at least involves thinking that that thing is worth caring about, then coming to think that nothing matters, so the view goes, may well cause you to stop caring about anything. So that's all just background. I think everything there is, or should be, fairly uncontroversial. I have my doubts about the claim that accepting nihilism will lead to the complete decay of subjective concerns, but the rest of it, I think, shouldn't be disputed. So, some assumptions for the argument, for the wager. First of all, accepting nihilism will likely change our behavior. I think this is plausible. It doesn't seem plausible to me that if we come to accept nihilism, I'm going to talk as if we're not nihilists at the moment, and so accepting nihilism would be a change. I think it's plausible that if we come to think that nothing matters, this has to somehow change our behavior, even if only around the edges. So, for example, if I become a moral error theorist, and I come to think that really nothing matters, it's at least plausible that I will become less inclined to donate money to, I don't know, global charities. I say global charities because I'm thinking of Peter Singer style donations where we may not even see the benefits that we're creating. And you may dispute this. You may want to say that, in fact, accepting nihilism will just let us carry on in much the same way. Kahane argues against that claim, but if you do think accepting nihilism will want us to, will allow us to carry on in the same way, then the wager is not really aimed at you, and you may well just want to consider it in a conditional sense. What if someone were such a committed nihilist that their behavior did change? And following on from this, wrongly accepting nihilism makes us less likely to comply with our reasons. What I mean is, if there are reasons for action, but we mistakenly, perhaps justifiably, but nevertheless mistakenly, come to think that there are no reasons for action, assuming that this will change our behavior, it does seem likely that this will make us less likely to comply with the reasons that we do have. So, for example, if I do have reason, perhaps very strong reason, to donate 10% of my income to Oxfam, and becoming a nihilist means I stop doing this, then accepting nihilism has meant that I comply less with my reasons. And as Kahane discusses, unless we are very skeptical about our ability to know what reasons we have, it certainly seems unlikely that incorrectly or wrongly accepting nihilism would make us more likely to comply with our reasons. It's not conceptually impossible, but it just seems unlikely. So, just going to background those assumptions. And we're now ready for the wager. Okay, so two possibilities, two things we can do. Two possibilities along the top are the metaethical truth. Either it's true that nothing matters, or it's true that some things matter. So nihilism is true, nihilism is false. And then along the left-hand side, the other axis, are views about the situation. Believe some things matter, so continue being realists, or believe nothing matters, become nihilists. And I'll take the right-hand column in turn. The contents of the right-hand column more or less follow from everything that's been assumed so far. If some things matter, and we continue to believe that some things matter, no change. If some things matter, but we believe nothing matters, then we're less likely to comply with our reasons, less likely to promote those things which do matter, and there will be a normative loss. Especially if Kahane is right that, in fact, believing that nothing matters might make us lose all subjective concern, in which case we will really quite dramatically stop complying with our reasons. The more contestable, interesting half of the wager is in the left-hand column, which is where nothing matters. Nihilism is true. And the core idea behind the wager is that on this column, it doesn't matter whether we believe that some things matter or not. It doesn't matter how we act, because there are no reasons, and so no reasons to either comply with or fail to comply with. That's why the entries in the table I've marked with dashes, and just to quote from Kahane for a second, those entries are, we might say, beyond good and evil. They are not zero valued. It's not like the degree to which we comply with our reasons is zero, however that would be interpreted. It's that there are no values, so there's some kind of presupposition failure there. The entries there are not even zero. And so The idea behind the wager is whether or not some things matter, you at least can't do worse if you believe that some things matter. If you believe that some things matter and you're right, you get the status quo. If you believe that some things matter and you're wrong, well, you don't lose out. If you believe that nothing matters and you're right, well, you don't lose out. But if you believe that nothing matters and you're wrong, some things do matter, that could be a catastrophe, serious normative loss. Oops. Next slide. So the idea behind the wager, bracketing some of the assumptions I made before the presentation of the wager, is that it involves dominance reasoning. There's no expected value calculation required. Believing that some things matter at least is not worse and maybe better on every possible state. It's not like we have to assign credences to the truth of nihilism and to other metaethical theories and calculate an expected value. An assumption that's required for this is that nihilism also rules out epistemic normativity, because otherwise someone might respond that, look, if you believe the truth of nihilism correctly, then sure, there's no normative gain in terms of reasons for action, but if there are genuinely normative reasons for belief, you win that way. So I think for the wager to be neat, we also need epistemic normativity to go out the window too. So we can imagine that the target of the wager is, the most radical form of nihilism that we can imagine. And just to draw out the analogy with Pascal famously argued that we should get ourselves, if possible, to believe in the existence of God, because if we correctly believe in the existence of God, we might get a reward after death in the form of eternal life. And if we incorrectly believe in the existence of God, well, we don't lose anything after death because annihilation is facing us. So, at least ignoring any kind of sacrifices religious belief might involve in this lifetime, that wager involves a certain kind of dominance reasoning too. After death, you might win, and you certainly won't lose, if you believe in God. So, the wager is puzzling. It's a fascinating argument, but can't help but shake the sense that there's some kind of trickery afoot here. And what I'm going to do in the remainder of the talk is to just try and sketch one way in which we might think that it's trickery. First, I want to make a brief distinction. Arguments, genuine arguments, somehow, a lot of bodies are buried there, provide us with reasons or illuminate the reasons that we have. Whereas rhetoric doesn't provide reasons, and perhaps doesn't even pretend to. Rhetoric is merely motivational speech. And of course, most philosophical arguments will probably at least aim to have elements of both. And as Kahane sees, if nihilism is true, then the wager doesn't give you any reasons. Because, as he sees, on one of the columns that we considered, nothing matters, there are no reasons. So in particular, there are no reasons provided by the wager. And so, this is, I think, one way of bringing out what smells a little fishy about the wager, which is the argument says, okay, I'm going to provide you with some reasons to avoid belief in nihilism. We're going to consider two possibilities. Oh, and on one possibility, there are no reasons, including no reasons to avoid belief in nihilism. And on the other possibility, there are reasons to avoid belief in nihilism. So, providing reasons by by using an inference rule that involves not quantifying over, but disjoining the possibility that there are no reasons, perhaps feels a little fishy. And just to reiterate that, really, one way of putting the fishiness is that if you think of the wager as involving an expected value table, now, of course, it's a very ideal, desirable kind of expected value table because it involves dominance reasoning, so there's no reason to actually calculate any expected values. But there are dashes rather than zeros in part of the table. And what the wager seems to do is it seems to treat beyond good and evil in the table, those dashes, as if it's a zero. Officially it doesn't, but in order to make sense of the claim, well, you might do better and you at least can't do worse, we at least need the possibility, we at least need to be able to compare the dash with the normative loss case. When we say you can't do worse, or, it could be worse if you wrongly accept nihilism. But of course, strictly speaking, the normative loss case is not worse than the dash. For the argument to go through, it relies on containing the beyond good and evilness, so to speak, in that one column. And I think the fishiness of the argument lies in the fact that it's really not obvious that can be done. So, just one way in which we might think the wager is a piece of rhetoric, we think about what is the normative content of the argument? What reasons does the argument provide? Well, it only provides reasons if nihilism is false. So we can lose the disjunctive payoff table structure and only consider that table on which some things matter. And in that case, the normative content boils down to something like, nihilism is false, so don't accept it. Which really isn't any extra normative content. That's not giving the non-nihilist reasons which she didn't already have. She already believed that nihilism was false. Now, of course, there are some extra reasons there, which is bringing out the possibility that if you believe that nihilism is false, you should steer clear of anything that might lead you to believe it's true or to accept nihilism, because the consequences might be disastrous if the consequences for practical action are as we discussed. But strictly speaking, that's not part of the wager. And what about a mistaken nihilist? So we're imagining that some things matter and then someone wrongly accepts nihilism. This might be thought to be the best case for the wager, because this is someone who doesn't believe there are, but who faces reasons to accept realism, to deny nihilism. What effect can the wager have on her? Well, of course, the wager can give her reasons, but by definition, at least if she's a convinced nihilist, she is not in a position to act on those reasons or to be convinced by those reasons, because she won't accept that it provides reasons. So even in the case where nihilism is false, when talking to a convinced nihilist, if the wager is going to have any effect on her, it's not going to be with upfront, reason-giving, rational conviction. Again, here we're looking at a certain kind of rhetorical force. Although, of course, she might come to retrospectively see that it's a good thing that she was rhetorically moved, because the wager did in fact provide her with reasons. And just to mention, this criticism can't be lodged against Pascal's wager, because whether or not God exists, the kind of prudential considerations involved in Pascal's wager do not break down. They allow for the assignment of values to each cell in the payoff table. Just to conclude, I presented Kahane's wager. I think it's absolutely fascinating. Still not quite sure what my response to it is. I've raised some issues with it, which are far from decisive. And as you might be able to tell from the hesitancy in my voice, as someone who flirts with nihilism, am a little disturbed by the argument. And so I've got some motivated reasoning to try and find a response to it. But I think on balance, it's best understood as a piece of rhetoric to motivate non-nihilists and keep them away from the nihilistic edge. Okay, thank you very much. Cheers.